Hi everyone, Tea Drinker here, and today I am reacting to Black Sails, Season 4, Episode 5. Where you at, Sylvie? Man, that reminds me of the hatch from Fallout 3, for anyone who's played that. Great shot.
Collateral? What the fuck are you talking about?
Oh, Billy.
To guarantee our compliance.
Things have become so complicated since Season 1.
Eleanor Guthrie told you she'd surrender forward. Are you really gonna make me ask?
Great rack focus.
It wasn't all she got.
Here we go.
But we would retrieve and surrender to her the cache of gems remaining from the Urka gold.
What's Billy gonna do? He's gonna just murder Sylvie.
It guarantees. The offer was put to Captain Flint. He had little time to decide.
Oh, you're rationalizing his actions. Do you though? Do you trust his judgment? Like, we did not get a certain look on Sylvie's face when he said that.
She asks that you withdraw to allow for this transaction to proceed.
Is the governor still approaching?
I was under the impression that she would try to keep it a secret as much as possible, so... there's gonna be strong conflict here.
She said you should trust that her commitment to you remains inviolable.
There we go.
And that this is no betrayal.
That
An
word.
act of love.
That word, commitment and love. Frighten me. I gotta say, I've have really grown to love Rogers as a character.
Come hard to starboard and make your course north-northwest.
Yo!
Stand down the gun crews.
But of course now Eleanor has the cash.
Thank you.
What is gonna happen now? There's just so much distrust now.
So much to give up,
Does Maddie agree?
but I think he made the right decision.
Okay.
Controlling Nassau without the cash will be a challenge. It will be the only way to regain the trust of those slave communities, uncertain about what this alliance stands for.
Oh, no.
And you know as well as I. Wait.
Oh, Sylvie knows
He
she's
was
correct.
afraid.
If it all ended and we had to walk away from it, would that be enough for you?
Oh. Kind of came up against a wall there. Unrelated to the story, but the acting in that scene was, as always, just complete 10 out of 10. You could not ask for better.
Mr. Scott.
Oh.
He told me that he feared for the safety of his wife and his daughter.
Oh, she didn't know.
Be safe.
Well, we suspected that, but still.
Killed in the raid.
Yeah.
Are they still alive?
Oh. Oh, oh! When she learns about Maddie. Oh, the way in which these threads are coming together.
But always with a man behind me, doing his damnedest to bend it all to his benefit. My father, Scott, Charles, you.
She really takes her betrayals to heart.
Harbor Patrol is deploying. We've arrived.
He's such a brilliant character.
Perhaps a different empire will.
Yo!
Strike our colors!
Crazy shit. So now if our guys were of the opinion that Rogers has actually retreated and now he's gonna come back stronger than ever, Havana. The Empire Strikes Back. And oh my god, that brass going on in the soundtrack. Love the fact that we're following him. This is going to lead to great payoff for all the setup we've been given so far about the Spanish Empire. Unrelated to what we're seeing here, but I'm very curious to find out where Jack and Anne are. Hans is going to come out with some wise words. And why wouldn't he? He's the Irish character.
Worry ain't a good look for a king, not in a kingdom like this, where loyalty is in short supply.
Jesus. What a catalyst. What a catalyst for him changing as a character. Oh my god. So much division And they don't know how strong Rogers is. Oh my god, that shot is fantastic. I can't imagine Rogers being slain at this juncture.
Beneath the flag of surrender, he was butchered. You likely wielded the sword.
Nice parallel as well with Rogers' brother.
I'd simply ask that you burn it all to the ground.
The parallel between Rogers and Vane and what both of them represent for Nassau is so interesting.
All you have to do is look the other way.
I don't want it happening in full view of that beach.
It has to be a double cross. It has to be.
What was that?
Great focus. I wonder if we're going to get the result in this episode. Well, we should. I mean, they don't usually give us those kind of cliffhangers. Oh, yes, the connection. Knowing that she's looking at Mr. Scott's daughter, I'm so glad they brought that into it. I know they did set it up, but still.
He just said it. I think no one had the balls to defy him.
Holy shit.
I told them if it was gonna happen. I thought it should be a friend.
Huh.
Stop!
Holy shit. I mean, it had to happen. There was no way Sylvie was going to betray Flint like that.
What the fuck is this?
Oh, yo!
I don't know.
Was not expecting Jack to just stroll up. Oh my god. Where is this going? And now is he going to see this, the Spanish underway?
What is it? What do you see out there?
What a great setup.
That man will never surrender his position here.
Mm-hmm.
He will never allow him.
Better for Flint to find this out sooner than later.
Woodes Rogers will be returning. And this fight isn't nearly over.
I'm getting chills. Oh, shit. Amazing. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to get right into the next episode, so the review will be coming up in just a second. I gotta say, halfway through season 4, I think it's fair to say that they are going to deliver for the final 5 episodes. Only 5 more episodes left of Black Sails Forever, but I mean, to say that I am impressed would be an understatement, and I'm so looking forward to being able to rewatch these episodes as well. So that's all for the reaction, and the review will be starting now. So, right before we get into the introduction scene with Sylvie and Billy on the beach, I want to talk about the opening shot of the episode of Sylvie walking towards the wooden door and opening it. Just reminded me so much of leaving the vault in Fallout 3. Fallout 3 is my all-time favorite game, so I just had to give that a really quick shout out. Okay, so the introductory scene is only brief. It's only there to give us the exposition that a deal has gone down, in which Flint is being used as collateral in order to get, as Sylvie says, a woman who's completely unknown to him onto a longboat to talk to the governor, which is setting us up for the succeeding scene in which we actually see Miss Hudson prepare for that. I just think it's great. I know it's only a very small scene at the beginning. It probably doesn't warrant too much talking about, but I did just want to highlight the fact that from a pacing point of view, it's great that we immediately got Sylvie's reaction to leaving the tunnel, staring back up at the fort, then immediately going to Billy, all as a precursor to Hudson's scene. So I felt it was worth talking about. And so we get the next scene. Well, it's not really the next scene. All of this is pretty much just one large scene, just intercutting back and forth between characters. We get Elle talking to Miss Hudson about going onto the ship and telling the governor, and you know what to say to him, and you also know what not to say to him. So we get set up for this episode, even if you, regardless of whether or not it's going to last the entire episode as a plot point, nonetheless you do get a little bit of an emotional setup for Eleanor in knowing that Hudson has to deliver this message, and it would be easier were he to know of her pregnancy, but she doesn't want him finding out this way. And then Hudson, I love that bit of her walking out of the fort. She just looks so terrified in that moment, just so apprehensive. As a side character, I am really impressed with the amount of time we've been given Hudson. It doesn't seem too much or too little. It seems like just amount for this particular type of character. So then the continuation on is Sylvie having to tell Billy the truth that it's not just Flint they're having. We also promised them the remaining gold from the Urca de Lima, and Billy's reaction is very appropriate for that information. So it's great continuation given the previous episode of the conversation both of those two men were having. And now here we have the situation where Sylvie, all he can say to Billy in this situation is, look, I trust his judgment. He was pressed for time and this is the best that he could do. And Billy's reaction obviously is going to be completely incredulous given the full context of everything that they've been through at this point. So it's a very, very strong setup for the conflict for the remainder of the episode. God, from rewatching, this show is doing such a fantastic job of bleeding the scenes into one another, making this feel like one continuous sequence. So I suppose everything up until Rogers willingly turning the boat around could be considered to be one elongated sequence, but nonetheless I just love the way they were able to do that, both with the shots as well as the music as a constant underneath. So we see Elle firing cannonballs in Rogers' direction in order to make the message clear that he is to turn around, something which Rogers is unwilling to relent to, up until the point that Hudson gives him explicit reminders of Elle's love for him in language that only Elle herself would be able to articulate. So it's we can clearly see the confliction that Rogers would have in a moment like this. We can see how he sees, especially having learned of the deal that she has proposed with Flint. We can see how narrow focus he's going to be on trying to resolve the issue, and then immediately being reminded of the trust Elle has in him, and as such the trust he should have in her. Having that to be the thing that affects him enough to bring everything back in, I think is very, very strong. I think it says a lot about the love that both those characters have for one another, and more importantly, the degree to which he truly is beginning to trust her. You know, in the previous episode, of course, we had the awful brutality towards Teach, the episode before last, I should say. We see how dark of a character, how malicious and sadistic of a character Rogers can be, and Elle seems to be, for lack of a better term, the anchor to that. She seems to be the only person who, like, I can imagine if she was there on the boat with Teach when all that was happening, that she would be the one to bring him back from that level of anger. So, you know, in a way, as audience members seeing him now turn away and going somewhere else, and now they're even more divided, in a way, one would be forgiven for feeling even more apprehensive due to the fact. And, you know, out of context of this show and what's going on at the period, it's so strange to see a lover's quarrel that involves one of them firing cannonballs at the other. like out of context, you're driving your ship towards ongoing fire from the person who you then have her chambermaid telling you, oh yeah, she really loves you, by the way. Just out of context, it's not lost to me just that yeah, this was a different time. Oh man, next we had this fantastic scene between Maddie and Sylvie. We're really, really getting into the good stuff now. Okay, so like that scene in which Sylvie is being told by Maddie the only way in which we can move forward adequately is to just get Billy out of the picture. Like Sylvie, he's on the surface, he's so torn about that. Like he's torn in a way that from the very beginning, he's very indignant about it. He's trying to say, like, are you actually kidding me? We're going to do this instead of that. He's on the surface very taken aback of Maddie's approval of surrendering the cash so that they can actually be safe from Julius's gang. that they could be safe from any reprisals given what Billy has done to us. On the surface, Sylvie seems very taken aback and very angry, but we know that he knows Maddie was very likely to approve of this. We know that because he wouldn't... The type of anger he is, and this is where you have to give credit to the actor, because so much of that is done through facial expressions. We really don't give the actors enough credit for the physicality, because to me, when it comes to character interaction in Black Sails is very much a show about what isn't said as well as about what is said. So, you know, Sylvie kind of putting on this, almost you could call it a farce to a degree, of acting as if he is just so surprised that Maddie would agree with Flint. Of course we know what's going on here. He doesn't want to depart from Billy. He is so attached to Billy that he doesn't want anything to thwart that. And for Flint to stand in the way of him and Billy was one thing, but now it is made explicitly clear to him that Maddie can stand in between him and Billy, which you can really feel for Sylvie in that moment. As the scene goes on, we get this really interesting interaction that's also very, very heartbreaking, in which Sylvie asks her the direct question, if it wasn't for this war, would I be enough for you? And Maddie basically says no. She lingers on the thought, and for her to linger on the thought and not be able to say anything is pretty much a direct no, and it's a far more honest no because of that. I'm finding it interesting trying to just investigate a little about Sylvie's mentality about all this, like how much of it is due to him maybe seeing a potential ending to this war, or a potential solution to all of this, or how much of it comes from his own internalized exacerbation of going through this process to begin with. If you're watching the episode up until this point, you are inclined to think that there is some large existential problem that Sylvie is going through, but it hasn't been vocalized yet, so you're not sure of the source of it as you think about himself. Is he thinking about Flint? Is he thinking about Maddie? Is he thinking about all of them together? Or is there something completely else? Is there a less reasonable, perhaps emotional thing at play, like maybe an undercurrent of anxiety or fear, or the pressure of being Long John Silver that's really acting up? But we know enough about Sylvie that it's probably not that. So it's more likely the former rather than the latter. So again, that ending bit of dialogue sets up a great deal of intrigue. And, you know, for me, I've seen the rest of the season. I've watched the series to the end. These are the rewatches now. This is me rewatching to do the review. So I do have the hindsight of being able to tell where certain things go and where certain things don't. But in and of itself, I just think that that's it's so interesting how they're just giving us these little pockets of Sylvie's internalized torment. Like, we can really see he's being torn up psychologically about this fight having to go on. So there's a great sense of mystery that's being delivered by the show, and whether or not they will or won't deliver upon that mystery, irregardless, it does such a great job of just giving a little bit more characterization to Sylvie's character. Oh, and we got a great scene with Elle finding out the truth about Scott, that Scott had a daughter and wife all this time. And another great insight into Elle's mentality as to how she views herself in relation to all of this. She references how she's had to go through, like, for her to know her own identity in relation to who she was with her father and who she was with Scott. And it just seems to be, be it her father, be it Scott, be it Charles, be it Flint himself, that behind her all the time is a man trying to bend her to his own benefit. And she laments there being so many goddamn men here, to which Flint then asks her directly, what is it that makes Roger so different from the rest of us? It's so interesting to see, like, there's a lot you can say about the division between the intellectual response from Elle versus the emotional response, but I think that there's from my point of view, there's a very tangible sense of heartbreak that she has for Scott. Not just with regards to her losing Scott, but knowing that Scott has a wife and daughter and now he is leaving her behind. There might be some people hearing that who think that that's just me being a little bit sentimental, who think that the scene is, very directly trying to do more than just expressing her anger and her sadness towards Scott dying and Scott leaving behind a wife and daughter. But no, for me, like, even without seeing further episodes and letting that color my opinion, I'm just literally talking about the scene in and of itself and everything we know about Elle up until this point. I don't think it's... To me, I think the scene is deliberately doing two very distinct things there. I think it is trying to illustrate her very real frustration of having to be, for lack of a better term, kind of under the thumb of men for so long throughout the series and obviously her life. But I do think a contributing factor to her anger in that moment is just her trying to deal with the sadness, not only of, feeling the betrayal from Scott to whatever degree, but she did care about Scott. She did truly care about him. She truly cared about the fact, having just learned that he has a wife and daughter, she's obviously going to have compassion because she is a compassionate person. Elle is far, far from a sociopath. She has done very bad things to achieve her as an ends to a means. But no, for me, I think, for lack of a better term of putting it, I think she's going through a lot right now. I think that there is quite a considerable amount going on. So for as much as I did like the further characterization of how she views herself in relation to men and the level of betrayal that she's going through over and over and over again, I do think that there's a very tangible sense of loss for Mr. Scott, and in particular for, as we will see in the rest of the episode, but again, not even in the rest of the episode, just from everything we know about her thus far, there's a sense of loss of the way things could have been. What if things had been the case where Mr. Scott could have lived here with his wife and child? And given the fact that, given Mr. Scott's age, his daughter would be close to her own age. And regardless of whether or not she would even remember her, to even just think of that on a conceptual basis, I think that there's just so much weight and there's so much surrounding context in small little scenes like this in Black Sails, in that everything that's in Black Sails is there for a reason. And they don't let anything go, and they don't let anything about the characters be forgotten about. And to me, that's just what makes the show as incredible as it is. I want to briefly talk about the interaction that Hudson and Rogers have just had, because I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Like, directly on the heels of me just saying, yeah, Ella isn't a malicious person. That's just not her type of thing. Here we have Rogers talking about how he senses an insidious side to Elle, that something might be woken within her. He's referencing how, just in so many words, talking about how Elle's insidious side seems to have qualmed since they've been together, and now she fears that her apprehension towards Nassau being taken might have awoken something back in her again. And for him to have that line saying, civilization has many faces, and to think otherwise is a terrible mistake. Him using that word civilization, and what I referenced a couple of times in my previous reviews, in like the last 2 or 3 reviews, I referenced how Max talks so much about civilization to Berenger. Her talk about her fear of civilization. And as a stark contrast, now we have Rogers with his lack of fear about civilization, which Yeah, we can see why Max and Rogers would certainly be of two separate philosophies in that regard. But you know, getting that scene where he's sitting there and we see the wheels turning in his head, considering how he's considering where Elle's mind is, but more importantly, where her mind might be. So if we're to infer that what he's doing here is a means to an end of self-preservation, both for himself and Elle. He literally says that line twice in this short scene. There's very little I wouldn't do to protect my wife. I mean, and then, like, that's not even going into the whole dynamic of, it's genuinely not even going into the dynamic of him doing something because he thinks it's saving Elle, but really it's saving himself. It's not even speaking of him doing something where he feels that he's like moving her away from the darkness, that he's pulling her away from that insidious part of herself. Not even getting into those two things, just literally in and of itself, in the literal factual sense of the term, of him literally saving Elle's life. And the fact that Hudson knows her secret as well, amidst that entire conversation. It was a short scene, and I know it's not even a scene unto itself. It's part of this larger sequence of them arriving in Spain, but I had to mention that. I just thought it was so great to see. I've just realized my microphone has been on the table. I don't know how long it's been on the table for, but it's back now. If the previous scenes had really low audio, I apologize. Or if the quality is bad because I had to raise it in post and fix it, yeah, whatever. He's here now. Why did I gender my microphone? I don't know. The point is, you know, in this scene, talk about having a bargaining chip. Like, it's one thing to show up to the governor of, to request parley with the governor of the empire you're at war with, and request an audience with a lot of money or some sort of peace treaty, but then to show up with the head of Blackbeard, that's certainly a bargaining chip. In any case, I have to also just stress the fact that in the introduction to this scene, when they are arriving, we get that gorgeous wide shot introducing the location itself, but it goes on for quite a bit, and then seeing it pop up in the corner of the screen, the title saying Havana, brilliant. Just, you get a sense of that being like an introductory chapter. Like, there's a real sense of gravity towards something like that. Again, just to kind of bring up a bit of a video game reference, it's it does feel like when you're getting a title or something popping like that, and you know that this is serious where you are now, and the music that's coming underneath, I've said it lots in the following reactions, which you'll be seeing for the rest of the series. In the reactions, I'm constantly talking about the music. The music in season 4 is just absolutely insane. They're really adding way more variety that's been there before. Not that the previous seasons have lacked variety in music. All the music that is there in Black Sails always feels appropriate. It never feels like it's lacking or it's too minimal or anything like that. It's a Goldilocks approach where they get it just right. They have it just making enough of an impression, but also keeping it subtle enough. And the music is in no way a distraction in season 4 because it's varied, but they're doing stuff like they're having much darker chord changes. They're having a bit more emphasis on brass. For example, when they are coming into Havana and you get that brass music operating underneath, like, it does create a sense of foreboding. And again, just in to compare to a video game, like if you're playing an RPG and you're entering a location that you've never entered before, like in, I don't know, Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom or something like that, you're entering this new location and you get the music introduction as well as the title saying exactly where you are. It gives a sense of importance to where we are. As for the scene itself, in which I was about to say teach, in which Rogers has been speaking to request parlay. It's great again just to see the tenacity to which Rogers is operating under, even when they're approaching first, and his quartermaster is afraid that they're going to be blown to smithereens. To which Rogers very, very confidently says, you know, if this were to go other way around, wouldn't you want to see what these people are about? I gotta say, I mean, like, of course, there's so much about Black Sails that sets Rogers up to be an antagonist, and it sets him up to be the, you know, proverbial unlikable character or whatever. I am completely fascinated by him. I am truly, truly fascinated by him. Like, we get the little bit of backstory behind him that he spoke to Berenger about, and that Jack referenced, and that Elle referenced about his book. And we're able to infer enough knowledge from the little information we've been getting that he is a person who has not dealt with the things he has had to see, with the things that have been done to him, and most importantly, the things that he has done to others. That everything he's been through has solidified within himself this very strong philosophical value system of basically devoting himself to the cause of England, and then everything that's going to come along in that path. So in and of itself, of course, as we saw in the previous season, he operates as a fantastic foil to the character of Flint in that regard. Be that as it may, I thought that this arrival scene in Spain I thought it was very well done, in the sense that you do get a sense of, even without seeing the succeeding scene in which he is speaking to the governor, you get a real sense of the power of the Spanish in this scene. Our next scene with Billy and Sylvie speaking. So I referenced a few times how there's, with this being the type of show it is, there's definitely scenes which can serve as a microcosm for the rest of a season, or the rest of a character arc, or the rest of the series, even to a particular degree. I think that's applicable with a lot of television shows when you're getting characters who are in constant conflict with one another, and they're going through the similar struggle again and again, and you're getting the same sort of characterization again and again, then any one of those scenes could be used as a means of evaluating the larger role that conflict plays. And given the fact that these are all dots that are connected, it's done so in such a way where you can select one of those dots and see all the lines connected to it. And that in and of itself serves as the aforementioned microcosm. And for me, watching that scene of Sylvie and Billy talk, the conflict there, the conflict there in Billy saying to Sylvie very directly that I want to be on your side, and I want you to be on my side, and both men are able to recognize the uselessness of the conflict between both of them. And when Billy says, you know that this fight is going to defeat us sooner or later, to me, that's allowed Black Sails to really click in my head. Even without having seen the succeeding episodes, that bit of Billy saying, you know we're going to lose one way or another, knowing how Billy feels about fighting England, and knowing how Maddie feels about fighting England, and knowing how Flint feels about fighting England, and knowing how Charles Vane felt about fighting England, and knowing how Eleanor feels about aligning herself with England, and then how the characters of Max and Jack and Anne, how they all interact with the same conundrum. To me, this scene is a great illustration. It's part of a larger mosaic of scenes and moments that create this mosaic-like picture of the philosophical statement of Black Sails, one of the philosophical statements of Black Sails, one of the philosophical issues that the show is trying to portray, which is, do you fight? Do you fight this war? Do you achieve your peace by fighting this war? Or do you achieve this peace by letting it go? And do I think that this scene with Billy and Sylvie, do I think it would have been a lot more pronounced had Billy been having this conversation with Flint instead? I think that nonetheless having it with Sylvie at all, given Sylvie's investment, not only in Flint's cause, but of course Maddie's cause, and the slaves' cause as well, and wanting the alliance with them, and of course Billy saying to Sylvie in that moment, you know, like, if they want freedom, it's here in Nassau, let's build it now, instead of trying to take on this behemoth of a force where we're guaranteed to fail, if not tomorrow, then maybe in a year, maybe in a decade, maybe in a century, but it is eventually going to tumble. But nonetheless, the conflict, so much of the conflict in Black Sails is down to a philosophical argument that can't really be won because it's too valid for both sides. It's too understandable as to why Billy does what he does, and it's too understandable why Sylvie does what he does. I was about to say Flint, but obviously Flint has the emotional baggage and whatever. But compare how, maybe a better example is that if you were to compare Billy having this conversation with Maddie, and then you think about how both of those characters would maybe interact with Jack about this subject matter. Jack would take a lot more of a moderate approach. That's not to say that he's being apathetically centrist or something like that. It's just that Jack is going to have a value system far more based on individualist self-preservation and, in a way, if you'll permit me to say, maybe almost a bit of a too much of an intellectual argument for him to have the same kind of grip on a philosophical argument against should we or should we not be at war with England in comparison to Billy and Maddie, which is something that I always found so interesting about Jack, because I referenced a few times, I don't think maybe I said it a lot in the reactions, but I certainly said it in the reviews for the early part of season 3. It's just I'm always so fascinated by the type of relationship that Jack and Charles Vane had with one another. He was a former slave. He grew up in chains. So it would be pointless for me to try to say that Jack doesn't have that level of compassion or that level of ethics behind wanting to break the chains. But he doesn't seem to be wired in the same way Flint is wired, and Billy and Maddie are wired for an interaction with this type of war. I think it's just so interesting to see. I mean, arguably, for Billy's character, arguably even more than Sylvie and Flint, I think he really sees the bigger picture. He really sees and values the ecosystem and the community aspect to all of this. I mean, that's why the Underhill plantation happened. That's why at the beginning of the season we have Flint commenting on how, like, he even directly quotes back at Billy when Billy says, "my people." Billy and Maddie are such... I almost said Billy and Maddie. Billy and Maddie are so similar in that regard. So, in a way, I can imagine the argument that both Billy and Sylvie are having is something that could actually occur between Sylvie and Maddie, were Sylvie to go the completely opposite direction and say there's no way we can have this war. And I think, given previously in this episode, Sylvie directly asked Maddie the question, if it wasn't for this war, would I be enough for you? Yeah, this is what I mean when I say that the scene we just watched serves as a microcosm. There's just so because we're at this point of the story now. We're at this point in the series where every single scene has so much developed context behind everything that came before. You don't get this with movies. You only get this with long form storytelling, like a television series. We then get this incredible moment between Hans and Sylvie, in which Sylvie is very much brooding on his inner conflict. That, of course, on the upper abstract level deals with, you know, should we be at war, should we not be at war? But then, of course, on the lower, on the deeper part of it, it's him being a conflict as to how is he supposed to solve the situation with Billy? Because against what he wants, he wants to fight this war. That, for the multitude of reasons behind it. Like, yes, he wants peace, but he also wants war. But he has the previous conversation with Maddie where he's talking about, would it be better if we weren't fighting this war at all? But he also knows that the right thing to do is to side with Maddie and Flint in this situation. They are the ones who are going to be more reliable. And he's talking about the unforgivable nature of Billy's actions. And then, of course, it's going into, could I betray my brother like that? This is arguably the moment in the season, and also arguably the series thus far, where we see Sylvie truly, truly conflicted, like truly at his wit's end. And then to have Hans come in as kind of like at the climax of him going through this enormous emotional, intellectual dilemma. And for him to say, you have to make a choice. You cannot show this much deliberation. In just as many words, basically saying to Sylvie, you don't get to think anymore. John Silver got to think. Long John Silver does not get to think. Long John Silver has to make the decision for the people to follow, because loyalty is in short supply about this. So, like, the fact that the entire episode and the season itself, even the last 2 seasons, if you want to view it that way, there's so much there that has given Sylvie every right in the world to be this conflicted. And now he's Long John Silver and he doesn't get to have that privilege. Just, I don't need to elaborate too much on that. I feel it's pretty self-evident from everything I've been speaking about before, but that is just fantastic writing. Just absolutely fantastic. Like, they are, like, just the depth behind everything that's happening here. These writers are so focused on making this the most personal story they could to these characters. It's something that just fits my preference for storytelling so incredibly well. The scene with Rogers and the Spanish governor, I gotta say, my first time around watching that episode, oh my god, the first time around watching that scene in this episode, I did not appreciate how powerful it is. I did not appreciate the strength of the writing and the strength of the acting from both of those men as well. It begins with Rogers making this very articulate speech in which we get so much explicit exposition and confirmation as to his character motivation. He views the pirates of Nassau as being the destruction of civilization itself. He views himself as, in a way, the hero that can save civilization. Him seeing that, well, if the pirates of Nassau succeed here, then what's to say that doesn't then become a rallying cry for uprisals across the entirety of the New World, something which he directly references, directly says to the governor in order to say, this is what could happen to Cuba. This is what could happen to your entire empire if we do not kill the monster in the cradle. To which the governor is very, very stoically and very practically says to him, first of all, you are not my enemy just because a king tells me so. Don't insult me by saying that. And then continues on to recount how it is likely, if not absolutely the case, that Rogers is the one who murdered his brother, to which Rogers confirms. So in this moment, the governor is wondering, for what reason should it be the case where I aid you? Why have you not gone to these people instead? It's interesting because the speech that Rogers makes at the very end is basically what does convince the governor. But now the governor is going through the reasons why he shouldn't trust Rogers in this case. And for Rogers to go as far as to say that so long as you don't touch anyone in the fort, you can do whatever you want. As far as I'm concerned, you can burn the whole thing to the ground. With him not knowing exactly where Elle is going to be, with him having the utmost certainty in that moment that Elle is going to stay put, it's so powerful in the sense that I wouldn't go as far as to say that Rogers never did consider the possibility of Elle not being safe in the fort, but I just think instead he has convinced himself, be it out of fear, be it out of anger, be it out of the philosophical argument that he has towards being the savior of civilization, he is so convinced that this plan will work, the plan has to work, and that he's going to make the plan work, that even if he does have the thought within his mind of, what if Elle isn't safe in the fort? What if she is going to be on the ground when the Spanish arrive? Even if that thought were to be there, I think that he is just so overcome with the concept of his plan working that he's not allowing it to enter. From a more abstract kind of thematic look at the scene, less to do with the plot and more to do kind of like with the meaning and what the show's representing, that conversation is unbelievable. That conversation which the governor is speaking to Rogers, whom he knows is the one who murdered his younger brother, and how both of them view themselves as being the harbingers of the fight for civilization itself, and how everything that is happening is a means to an end of them achieving that similar goal, despite the fact that then they are also, from the more overarching political sense of things, they are at enemy, one being England and the other being Spain. And yet all of this happens with them having a very civilized conversation about it. There's just, Black Sails for me in so many ways is how we kind of unpack and look at these concepts from a bird's eye view in a way that we are detached from the reality of the situation to investigate the reality of the situation. And of course then it goes out saying how much of this is applicable to today and the real world, and nations not even necessarily being at war with one another, but just having any sort of conflict with each other, with both nations independently believing that they are going to save civilization. It's fascinating. The scene with Billy and Sylvie speaking to one another about how the cash is on its way and Sylvie needs to make a decision, which then ends with Sylvie embracing Maddie as well. It's a short enough scene that's just delivering us the exposition that Billy plans to kill Eleanor's men as soon as they make it outside and maintain the cash for themselves, and how Sylvie now has the ultimatum: either he needs to directly side with Billy or directly side with Flint. There's now no two ways about it at this juncture. Sylvie says to Billy that he'll do exactly what Billy wants, he just won't do it on the beach. He wants it out of view of everyone. And it very much, Billy seems to be convinced that Sylvie has agreed with him. As an audience, we know how much inner turmoil Sylvie has gone through, so we don't know at this juncture whether or not he truly is siding with Flint or Billy. We don't know at all. And then when he's talking to Maddie and she asks him, what was that about? And he turns to her, and the way he looks at her, and then it cuts back to Maddie, and there's just like the tiniest of muscle movements on her face that convey the character doesn't know what's going on. And then Sylvie embraces her. I think acting for television has to be the most difficult, given the parameters, of course, of what type of role you're doing. You know, I don't think there's the same level of a nuance in The Big Bang Theory or anything like that, but I just mean that when you have a camera that close up on you all the time, and you're doing stories that are this complex with characters that are so emotional and intellectually invested in what it is that they're doing, the tiniest of micro movements just conveys so much that it's a short scene, but I just had to talk about it for that aspect. Loved the interaction there between Elle and Flint when they get the news that Sylvie does intend for the exchange to happen outside the Northwest Tunnel. Elle saying very, very astutely that if there was anyone that wanted this exchange to be disrupted, it would be Sylvie himself, to which Flint just gives a practical response of, it makes sense to have it out of the way of the men, out of the way of the enraged pirates. Elle seems to accept that as an answer, or at the very least accept that there's no point in trying to argue that Flint trusts Sylvie in this regard. And then when she walks away, and the look that Flint has on his face, and then us as an audience, we're trying to figure out whether or not Flint totally trusts Sylvie in this moment, doesn't think anything is awry, and he's a bit taken aback by Elle's apprehension, or maybe Flint truly does know that Sylvie does have something up his sleeve, and now he's trying to figure out whether or not he is indeed siding with Sylvie or siding with Elle. There's quite a lot there. Given the relationship they've had and how adamant Flint was in the previous episode for Sylvie to trust him, I think we can infer that whatever it is Sylvie has planned, Flint is going to trust him on. But nonetheless, just having so much there within a short little scene is something I thought was really, really great. Jesus, that amazing scene. The absolutely amazing scene in which Billy and Sylvie officially cut ties, so to speak, or at the very least, Sylvie makes his betrayal of Billy known. He makes his siding with Flint fully known at this point. Like, watching it, just how I was completely taken in when we see the intercutting of Flint and Elle making their way towards the tunnel, and Billy and Garrett standing outside the tunnel and expecting both parties to meet at any moment. Then we get the reveal that Sylvie had led him towards Maddie instead. Was just fantastic. Garrett making that speech to Billy, saying how Sylvie lied to the men about how it was you that ran Flint into the barricade to begin with. It wasn't Featherstone, it wasn't Max, it was you. And when Sylvie said that, all the men believed him, not because he thought it was true, but because no one was willing to defy him. And Garrett then being the one to essentially sacrifice himself and saying that I'm not going to align myself with Sylvie any longer. And then about 20 seconds later, Teach just kills him. And 20 seconds is being generous. Okay, I'm being facetious, but it's a very powerful moment showing that rising tension, and especially with the music as well. Oh my god, it's just building up and up and up and up and up and up, especially when you think that Garrett for a split second is actually going to attack Billy, but then he turns and vows to condemn Sylvie instead. That entire sequence ending, thankfully, with Sylvie allowing Billy to live. Even just rewatching it there, when Hans stabs Billy and you get that cry from, you really, really think, oh my god, is this going to be the end? Because there was so much of talk in the episode about Sylvie viewing the end for his relationship with Billy having to be the end of Billy himself. So I thought it was great how Sylvie intervenes at the last minute and then acquiesces to Hans to bring him to the Underhill estate. Just a fantastic scene. Just absolute, like the way they had so much of the foundation built for a conflict, and then when the conflict comes, it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds to this enormous emotional climax. Just absolutely fantastic. Having just watched the final scene there, first of all, I just got to talk about how the music is absolutely sensational. as I've said many a time before throughout this entire season, but just, that final sequence there, and then how it bleeds into the end credits as well. Just terrific stuff. So we had Jack pop up, no Anne with him, so it's clear we're able to infer that her condition is quite critical, or at the very least her condition is so poorly that she has to stay behind. It's great. We have Flint relaying all of the backstory to Jack, saying that this is what's going to happen. We're going to make the bribe with the cash, and Jack gives him the direct question. It's like, right, and was this idea yours and Mr. Silver's, or was it just yours? And Flint basically says, yeah, it was just mine. And oh my god, like that, this scene worked so well in the sense that it shows, it's giving a fantastic setup for Flint and Elle for the succeeding episode, with in discovering that Rogers is not going to accept this bribe, that their plan with the cash has now basically fallen apart. Not only is the cash not here, but even if it was here, Rogers wants nothing to do with it. But for that to, and also of course it happens as a result, this exposition happens as a result of Jack himself witnessing the monstrosity, for lack of a better term. Monstrosity is a bit rough of a term. Maybe just the determination of Rogers, the unrelenting nature of Rogers, with Jack having seen what Rogers did to Teach, and Flint trusting Jack. In that moment, Flint realizes that, Jack is completely right in this situation. Having seen what Jack has seen, Rogers isn't going to give up. That there's nothing in the world that's going to stop him wanting the Pirates of Nassau to be burned to the ground. So those two elements in and of themselves are so strong. But I think just knowing that all of this is happening as a means to an end of being the conclusion of the arc, the conclusion of the episode arc for Rogers, in that, if you want to use the screenwriting terminology, that this basically is the Act 3 for Rogers, that this is the ending of that particular arc, or even if you want to say it's the ending of the half arc for Rogers, of him, really getting what he wants, that this is him fully committed to destroying Nassau. That if the inciting incident for Rogers at the beginning of this episode was Eleanor not necessarily thwarting him, but putting him into a position where he has to make a difficult decision, and he has to weigh up the options as to whether or not he truly wants to accept this bribe, or if he truly wants to give Nassau a chance, or whether or not he wants to go down the path of burning it all to the ground and rescuing Elle in the same breath. And him making that decision, and we getting the visual confirmation of that with that final shot of all the ships coming towards Nassau, and what that is going to mean, how this is now confirmed that the succeeding 5 episodes are going to be utter chaos for Nassau. It does so much for the character of Rogers. It does so much for the setup of Flint and Elle's, and consequently Billy and Sylvie's, and Jack's storyline, and Max's storyline. It does so much for all of that, but then just for the character of Nassau, if you want to view it that way, how this is, at this point in time in the entire series, undoubtedly, completely unquestionably, the biggest threat to Nassau. Nassau, with the final 60 seconds of this episode, Nassau has never been in more danger than ever before. And what a cliffhanger to end on. So yeah, I absolutely loved this episode, and now that we're kind of coming into the final few episodes of the entirety of the series, both this review for 405 and the one previously for 404, I'm spending way more time talking about each episode. It's taking quite a lot to review them, but I mean, look, I'm having an absolute blast doing it. There's so much depth behind everything that how could you not there? If you haven't caught up, if 405 is the newest episode you've seen from Black Sails, I won't go on any further to allude to anything, but I will just say that now that we've reached the halfway point of this season, they have just done such a terrific job of giving us resolution to certain storylines and giving us plenty of highs and lows emotionally with the conflict. But most importantly, they have given us so much setup, so much setup for the remainder of the season. I mean, for a halfway point of the season to be the Spanish Empire coming to raze Nassau to the ground, it doesn't get any better than that. I want to thank you so much for taking time to watch this reaction and this review of 405, and if you've made it all the way to the end of this video, I would like to leave you with a poem. W.B. Yeats, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There, midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. Thanks for watching.